Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. Broadcast on KGPT Channel 26.1, also its companion website kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, that's the Voice for Liberty on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. There the motto is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send a few times a week. You can like the Voice for Liberty on Facebook or follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, this week, an incentives deal for a Wichita company illustrates a capacity problem and the need for reform. This week, the Wichita City Council considered and passed an economic development incentives package intended to enable a local manufacturing company to expand its operations. And what the council did was to grant this company a 91% discount on property taxes on its expanded property. Because of the way Kansas state law works, the city, by its own action, is able to offer this discount not only for its own property taxes, but also for the property taxes that would otherwise go to the county, school district, and the state. And city documents gave some detail regarding the amounts of property tax to be forgiven on an annual basis for a period of up to 10 years. It's about $29,000 per year. And reading the City Council agenda packet, you might conclude that the only incentive the company is receiving is this property tax relief. But other sources indicate the company is applying to receive benefits under two State of Kansas programs, known as PEAK and HPIP. Now, we don't know how much the company benefit from these programs. That information is simply not available. What I'd like you to know and remember is that in the past, city documents have often mentioned other state, county, or even federal incentives the company will receive, and often the amounts were given. But in recent economic development items presented to the Wichita City Council, well, that information is no longer given. The names of other incentive programs are simply not mentioned. Now, this may seem like a small matter, but I think it's important for two reasons. First, the city tells us it wants to operate in a transparent manner, and the city actually believes it operates in a transparent manner. But no, not here in this case. All the city has to do is mention the names of the other programs the company is applying for. That would at least be a start. Then, this is also important because the city and our local economic development officials constantly tell us that Wichita has very few tools for the awarding of economic development incentives. By leaving out incentives offered by the state or other jurisdictions, the city promotes this false narrative. And here's another aspect of our economic development policies that is important. In order to prepare the incentives package, several events took place. There was a visit to the company, then another visit and tour. Then economic development officials helped the company apply for benefits from the Kansas Department of Commerce. Then documents say these officials worked closely with Wichita City staff on an incentive package. And what is the result of all that effort? Well, city documents tell us that the expansion will create 28 jobs over the next 5 years. And obtaining those jobs took a lot of effort from Wichita and Kansas economic development machinery. Multiple agencies and fleets of bureaucrats at the Greater Wichita Economic Development Coalition, the City of Wichita, Sedgwick County, and the State of Kansas were involved. Wichita State University had to be involved. All this to create 5.6 jobs per year for 5 years. The jobs are welcome, yes they are. But this incident and many others like it reveal a capacity problem, which is this. we probably need to be creating 5.6 jobs every working hour of every day in order to make any significant progress in economic growth. If it takes this much effort to create 28 jobs over 5 years, how much effort will it take to create the many thousands of jobs we need to create every year? And this assumes, of course, that the incentives are actually necessary to enable the company to expand. City documents stated that the tax exemption is necessary to make the project viable, in its words. In the article I wrote regarding this item before the council meeting, I wrote that it's likely that the mayor or city council members will say that if we do not award the incentives, the company will not be able to expand. And that's exactly what was said at the council meeting, except it came from the city's economic development director. This only hints at a larger problem. If companies cannot afford to make investments in Wichita unless they receive exemptions from paying taxes, well, I think we must conclude that taxes are too high. And an ongoing study reveals that generally, yes, property taxes on commercial and industrial property in Wichita are high. In particular, taxes on commercial property in Wichita are amongst the highest in the nation. It's either that, or this company simply does not want to participate in paying for the cost of government like most other companies and most people do. Or, and I hate to mention this possibility, it could be that we are being lied to. And we need to seriously consider the possibility that someone is lying to us. Here is an example from 2010 that will let you help judge the credibility of your local government. Well, in 2010, a developer wanted to build a grocery store. He applied for tax increment financing and a special community improvement district tax. And during a presentation to the city council, the city's former economic development director explained that to be eligible for the tax increment financing, developers must demonstrate a gap. That is, an analytical finding that conventional financing is not sufficient for the project and that public assistance is therefore required. And the council members were presented with financial figures that illustrated a gap. Well, purportedly illustrated a gap, I should say. Then the grocery store developer himself told the council that without public assistance, there will be no grocery store. He said, "We have researched every possible way. How do we make this project work with the existing funding that's available to us? We might as well say, if for some reason we can't figure out how to get this funding to go through, there won't be a shopping center over there." Then a former city council member who lobbies local government on behalf of clients spoke to the council. He was adamant in his insistence that the grocery store could not be built without public financing. He said, "There will not be a building on that corner if this is not passed today. That new building would not be built. I absolutely can tell you that because we have spent months trying to figure out a way to finance a project in that area. A grocery store is not going to move into the Plainview area. What you've heard is misinformation. This project just won't happen, and the people of Plainview will suffer." Well, that's the end of what the lobbyist told the Wichita City Council. Okay, so what happened? Well, the City Council approved both the TIF and CID economic development incentives. But in Kansas, the overlapping county, Sedgwick County of course, can veto the formation of a TIF district. And the Sedgwick County Commission did just that. So tax increment financing was no longer available. So the developer canceled the project. Well, but then another developer stepped up and built the project, the grocery store, with no government assistance. This is the Save-A-Lot grocery store at the corner of Pawnee and George Washington Boulevard. The claims that a grocery store could not be built in that neighborhood without economic development incentives was demonstrated to be false. And it was not just the beneficiaries of the incentives that made the claims. It was a top city official. And the city manager, mayor, and city council believed it. Now, city leaders are telling us that our economic development policies must be reformed. So far, that is not happening. Our leaders say that cash incentives are on the way out. And the deal the City Council handled this week did not include grants of cash, that is true. But a discount on taxes is more valuable to business firms than receiving equivalent cash. That's because cash incentives are usually taxable as income, while forgiveness of taxes does not create taxable income. Each dollar of tax that is forgiven adds $1 to after-tax profits. Also, the large amount of bureaucratic effort and cost spent to obtain a small number of jobs lets us know that we need to do something else in order to grow our local economy. We need to create a dynamic economy. We need to focus our efforts on creating an environment where growth can occur organically without management by government bureaucrats. Dr. R. Hall, his paper, Embracing Dynamism, the Next Phase in Kansas Economic Development Policy, it provides much more information on the need for this and how we can accomplish it. And another thing we can do to help organically grow our economy and jobs is to reform our local regulatory regime. Recently, Kansas Policy Institute released a study of regulation and its impact at the state and local level. You saw James Franco of KPI here on Wichita Liberty TV talking about its findings and implications. Creating a dynamic economy and a reformed regulatory regime should cost very little, and the benefits would apply to all companies, large or small, startup or established, local or relocated, in any industry. Our civic leaders say that our economic development efforts must be reformed. Will the path forward be a dynamic economy and reformed regulation, or will it be more bureaucracy chasing 5 jobs at a time? Yeah, there have been a few changes. We have a new mayor and a reorganization of our economic development agencies. We have to hope that whatever they decide to do works to bring more jobs and economic growth to Wichita. But I've watched these people for a few years, and I'm afraid I have to tell you that they do not understand and appreciate the principles of capitalism, property rights, and free markets. They do not embrace economic freedom. Instead, they prefer bureaucracy and cronyism. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. If the Kansas Public School Establishment wants to present an accurate assessment of Kansas schools, it should start with its presentation of NAEP scores. Kansas public school leaders are proud of Kansas schools, partly because of scores on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. It's known as the nation's report card. And Kansas does rank high amongst the states on this test. It's important, however, to examine the results from a few different angles to make sure we understand the entire situation. I've gathered scores from the 2013 administration of the test, which is the most recent data available. At wichitaliberty.org, I present this data in interactive visualizations that you may use yourself and customize. The most widely available NAEP data is for 2 subjects, reading and math, and for 2 grades, 4th and 8th. I want to show you some data for Kansas and the average for national public schools. I've also added Texas and Florida, as schools in those states have sometimes been mentioned in comparisons to Kansas. The numbers in the charts are the percent of students that score at or above proficient in 4th grade reading. If we look at the column for all students, well, there we see why Kansas public school leaders are proud. Kansas does well, with 38% of students at the proficient or better level. That's better than the national average and Texas, and just about equal to Florida. But we need to consider something else if we want to gain a better understanding of Kansas schools as compared to others. And that is that different ethnic groups typically perform differently on the tests, and states have widely varying mixes of demographics. So look at the column for black students only, and what do you see? Well, Kansas schools have lower scores than Florida and Texas schools, and Kansas scores are lower than the national average. Then for Hispanic students, we see Kansas performs better in comparison, but Florida Hispanic students outperform those in Kansas by a wide margin. Then for white students only, and this may really surprise you, Kansas lags behind all these three comparison groups. Now we've been looking at fourth grade reading. If we looked at other grades and subjects, we'd see trends like this there too. And of course, you can create the charts using my interactive visualizations of the data at wichitaliberty.org. So, despite Kansas having good scores when considering all students, when we drill down to subgroups, we see a totally different picture. Now, one possible interpretation of this data is that we need to spend more money on Kansas schools. That is the position of the Kansas School Spending Establishment. Well, let me show you figures from the United States Census Bureau regarding per-student spending on schools. You can see that Florida and Texas spend quite a bit less per student than does Kansas. How can we make sense of these results? How can Kansas do well when considering all students but lag behind when looking at subgroups? The answer is a statistical phenomenon known as Simpson's paradox. It has to do with comparing aggregated data when the composition of subgroups varies. For example, in Kansas, 68% of students are white. For the national public schools, the value is 51%. This large differential in the composition of students is what makes it look like Kansas students perform better on the NAEP test than the national average. But looking at the scores for ethnic subgroups, can we still say that Kansas schools outperform national public schools? It's important to know that aggregated data can mask or hide underlying trends. Let me ask you this. Have you heard of data like this from our public school leaders in Kansas? But the problem with our schools is worse than this. Wichita schools this week decided to pay an architectural firm an extra $720,000 beyond what was contractually required. You may remember that after Wichita School District voters approved spending $370 million on school buildings in 2008, the district needed someone to manage the overall bond issue project. The district decided to award the firm Schaefer, Johnson, Cox & Fry a contract for 1% of that amount, or $3.7 million. Somehow, the Wichita School District has already paid out that much money, but there is still more bond work to do. Therefore, the extra payments. An extra 19% in payments that are not required. This entire episode represents cronyism at its highest pinnacle. During the school bond issue campaign in 2008, the Schaefer, Johnson, Cox & Fry architectural firm made campaign contributions and, they managed the election campaign for the school district. Then right after the election, the school district awarded the firm the 1% management contract. It was a no-bid contract, which is one of the worst violations of good public policy. Awarding no-bid contracts to significant campaign contributors is illegal in some states. It ought to be illegal here, too. But for the Wichita School Board, it's business as regular. And what does the school district get for this 1%, for its $3.7 million and now an extra $720,000? Not long ago, I had a conversation with the named partners, Johnson and Cox, and they had a difficult time explaining exactly what the firm does to earn 1% of every dollar spent by Wichita School District taxpayers on new and renovated schools. And to top it off, when things went wrong with two school construction projects that were managed by Schaefer, Johnson, Cox, and Fry, well, the school district sued pretty much everyone except the bond manager. I asked, how does the bond project manager escape liability and accountability when things go wrong under its oversight? And no one can provide a satisfactory answer. During the 2008 bond issue campaign in Wichita, my analysis found that 72% of the political campaign contributions was given by construction companies, architects, engineering firms, and others who directly stand to benefit from new school construction. They tell it's all for the children, of course. But then if anyone is critical, well, it's because they hate children or hate education. Anyone who works for greater accountability of public schools is demonized that way. All this is happening against the backdrop of extremely loud complaints from public school spenders that spending is being cut. But overall, spending on schools is not being cut. For most school districts, spending has been rising and will continue to rise. The number of teachers and other school employees has been rising, and rising faster than enrollment has been rising. This means that the ratios of teachers to pupils has been improving. But still, Kansas schools uniformly complain of increased class sizes. Okay, I understand that teacher-pupil ratio is not the same measurement as class size. But if Kansas schools are hiring teachers faster than enrollment is increasing, and if class sizes are really increasing, well, what are these new teachers doing? Because of the way schools will be funded for the next 2 years through the block grants, the state has a chance to reform the way schools are funded. The present formula does not work. And here's an example. The formula uses something called equalization. This recognizes that there are very wealthy school districts in Kansas and also districts that are very poor. And equalization is meant to help the poorer districts. But get this, Johnson County is our largest and most affluent county. Median household income there is $75,000. In Sedgwick County, it's $50,000, and in Wyandotte County, only $39,000. Yet every school district in Johnson County is considered a poor district under the current formula. That even includes the Blue Valley District, which may be the most affluent school district in Kansas. There, the median house is valued at $309,000, but the district still qualifies for equalization aid. The public school establishment in Kansas is very bitter at the governor and legislature over school finance. But really, the public schools ought to be grateful for Governor Sam Brownback. In many states with conservative Republican governors, school choice programs have been expanded. Here, the Wall Street Journal in the summer of 2011 reports on what it calls the Year of School Choice. And some governors have been aggressive warriors for school choice. But not our Governor Sam Brownback. Yes, he signed a small school choice bill. But he has not exercised a leadership in advocacy for expanded school choice. Since the public schools and their unions despise any form of school choice and the accountability it provides, they should be grateful for our governor and legislature. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. As we move into the presidential election campaign, We're likely to see more discussion of raising the minimum wage as a way to increase the well-being of low-wage workers. This is not a very good idea. The following video from Prager University explains more about this very important topic in regulation.
Some politicians argue that raising the minimum wage helps the poor and disadvantaged. It might seem that way at first. Certainly workers who are earning $8 an hour today would be better off if they were earning $12 an hour instead. The problem is that this view of the minimum wage overlooks one important detail. A $12 minimum wage doesn't force employers to pay $12 to every worker. It forces them to pay $12 to the workers the employer chooses to keep. The employer pays $0 to the workers that get laid off or who are never hired in the first place. Let's look at an example. Suppose this guy owns a burger joint. The reason the owner hires a worker is because the worker generates value for the owner. Suppose that, not counting what he pays his worker, the owner makes 10 cents on every burger he sells. Here's Al. Al can flip 100 burgers an hour. If the owner makes 10 cents on every burger, not counting what he pays Al, then Al generates $10 worth of burgers for the owner every hour. If the owner pays Al $8 an hour, then the owner makes $2 an hour profit. $10 an hour on the burgers minus $8 an hour that he pays Al. Now, suppose that the employer hires 3 workers of varying abilities: Al, Bob, and Carl. Bob is a faster worker and can cook 120 burgers an hour. Carl is a slower worker and can only cook 90 burgers an hour. Since each burger is worth 10 cents to the owner, each hour Al produces $10 worth of burgers, Bob produces $12, and Carl produces $9. Suppose the owner pays Al, Bob, and Carl $8 an hour each. After paying the workers, the owner earns $2 an hour profit from employing Al, $4 an hour profit from employing Bob, and $1 an hour profit from employing Carl. In total, the owner makes $7 profit per hour from employing the 3 workers. Now, suppose the government imposes a minimum wage of $9.50 an hour. What does this do to the profit of our 3 workers? Al produces $10 worth of burgers per hour. At a cost of $9.50 an hour, Al now generates a profit of only 50 cents an hour for the owner. Bob produces $12 worth of burgers an hour. At a cost of $9.50 an hour, Bob now generates a profit of $2.50 an hour. But look at what happens to Carl. Carl produces $9 worth of burgers per hour, but he now costs the owner $9.50 per hour in wages. Carl is no longer generating profit for the owner. Carl now generates a loss. In fact, the owner would be 50 cents an hour better off if he fires Carl. The minimum wage was good for Al and Bob. They're each $1.50 an hour better off than they were before. But it was devastating for Carl. Carl lost his job, and so is $8 an hour worse off than he was before. Here's the first lesson of the minimum wage. It doesn't help the worker at the expense of the owner. It helps the more productive workers at the expense of the less productive workers. What's even worse is that the more productive workers usually don't need the help. What do you think would have happened over time to Bob, the most productive worker? Either the owner would have rewarded Bob's higher productivity with a raise, or if the owner didn't reward Bob, one of the owner's competitors would have offered Bob more money to go work for the competitor. Either way, eventually Bob would have ended up earning more anyway. This is the second lesson of the minimum wage. Many of the workers that it does help would have ended up better off anyway, even if the minimum wage hadn't existed. It works this way in the real world. Increases in the minimum wage have little effect on unemployment among college graduates. Increases in the minimum wage increase unemployment among high school graduates, and among the least skilled, least educated workers, increases in the minimum wage significantly increase unemployment. The minimum wage may be a well-intentioned policy, but it often hurts the very workers who are in most need of our help.